around the world. Today, we're going to be focused in on a very important and urgent information from Mexico. Thankfully, Mike Patterson alerted us to this issue around employment law and other issues related to doing business in Mexico. Mike Patterson is principal at Spencer Fane, sorry. Mike is an amazing attorney and person. I've known him for many years. He, as an attorney at Spencer Fane, he is connected to everybody. It seems like not just in the state of Arizona and in Mexico, but around the world. He does an amazing amount of international business law. And so he's right on top of things that are happening all the time. And we were very fortunate to have him alert us to this issue. And so what we're going to do today is Mike is going to be moderating this conversation with experts on the ground, both in the United States and in Mexico. And they'll be talking about what you need to know so that you can adjust and plan relative to your business. So Mike, thank you for being so extraordinary in everything that you do. We love working with you, and we're really looking forward to learning more today. Thank you.
Doug, and thank you, Doug. And as always, you're the hub of the international wheel that got started here in Phoenix 5 years ago and jumped to 525 locations around the world. Really an amazing group of chapters all over the world, which are creating business and neat things. So listen, I would like to introduce our panel. We have Adalberto Elias from Tetacawi, which is a leading shelter and maquila, and has done outsourcing and is very directly affected by this law, and is going to have some interesting comments for us. Raymundo Rodriguez from Castel Consulting in Mexico, who's also going to give us information on the consulting side. Eduardo Gonzalez from 258 Consulting. He's a former Mexico Deputy Trade Minister, first in Southwest California, and then also Southern California, and then over here in Arizona, until that program was also eliminated by the incoming President AMLO in 2006, 2018. So been a lot of changes. So let me just get to and then Christian, are you on our panel today? There you are. Hey, thank you, man. Listen, we are Sergio Chavez from Intermestic was ill today and not able to join us. So anyhow, let me set the stage for this conversation, okay? Mexico, the heavyweight competing with China on labor. When you have, as Eduardo will tell us, Mexico can go head to head with China when you consider in the shipment costs and you consider in getting in through ports, and even super quality in Mexico, the highest quality in manufacturing, can go head to head with China. No one can quite beat China's labor rates. However, let's talk about where Mexico is. London economists, New York economists 5 to 7 years ago were saying Mexico is number 15. I don't have enough fingers, but 15 world largest economy, but it is headed fast down toward a larger world economy. In fact, the world's leading economists 7 or 8 years ago were predicting that Mexico would pass some of the big giants in the world and move into the top 10 and be even the number 5 world economy. Wouldn't that just blow everything off of the charts, correct? And so Mexico was on this march. Some of the people on this call heavily involved in the automotive transformation in Mexico. Every world major automaker coming to Mexico and building and integrated in North America in the North American Free Trade Agreement, and then our new free trade agreement that USMCA, as it's called in the US. But the total integration between Canada, Mexico, and the US in automotive, and now in aerospace, and then in electronics, lots of different industries moving rapidly, and all of the gentlemen on this call heavily involved in that transformation. I have two clients, Adalberto Elias from Tetacawi. I have two of my clients that are producing and manufacturing on his plantel in Guaymas. So this amazing growth in Mexico from 15 going to the world's 5th largest economy, but there were some social rumblings. The top 10% in Mexico making all the money, and there's a substantial lower level, lower class that was not, and some disenfranchisement and concern about that. And what happened? It resulted in, we knew that there was a correction coming, and so without making any political statement, this erupted into a landslide Morena wave in 2018 that won not only the presidency, but both houses, brand new political party in Mexico that won not only the presidency, but both houses, majorities in both of the houses, the upper house and the lower house in Congress. But not only that, every governorship except for 5 or 6 around the country turned to Morena as well. And not only that, but mayors, alcaldes, and local officials won with the Morena party as well, a huge landslide. So now we're coming up on a June the 6th election in Mexico, in which there's, again, a lot at stake to either expand that Morena footprint or lose a few. And what happens? I don't think anybody's going to ignore that the timing of this bill that we're looking at today is clearly near the election that's coming up. But there is and let me also set the stage. 50 to 70 years of outsourcing in Mexico. Mexico's a country, and I'm sorry I'm a gringo, but if you cut me open, I'm Mexican in my heart, hopefully. And this is not a criticism, but Mexico's a country where they're really good at creative workarounds. Okay, so for example, you have a constitutional provision that prohibits foreign ownership in this many kilometers from every border and this many kilometers from the coast. And many Americans are very much aware that there's a workaround. You can buy your property through a fideicomiso, a trust that is owned by a bank, and then you are the beneficiary of that trust. That's a workaround for a strict law provision that prohibits foreigners to open, but it was there in the beginning 100 years ago for national defense, etc. In this case, for 50 to 70 years in Mexico, there has been a constitutional provision and labor law provisions that have required a profit sharing, initially 40%, as I understand, then deleted and then reduced over the years to 10% for Mexican workers. However, Mexico would not be competitive with China and others who are just really pounding on them for the labor. And the workaround for 50 to 70 years is giving higher wages to most people like Tetacawi and others, and the automotive industry paying much higher than minimum wage, but also doing outsourcing of the labor because of these concepts, many concepts of making these payments to laborers in order to come up with a regime or a standard practice in Mexico that would be competitive on the international level and to attract people to come to Mexico. So now what happens? We have a populist law that comes into being that within 90 days of just a couple of weeks ago, within 90 days, each company must restructure their operations to eliminate the outsourcing of their core function. So if my core function is to make parts for aircraft engines, that core function, I would not outsource that labor. And again, I'm not a Mexican lawyer, and so I'm going to depend on my Mexican lawyer friends to jump in now and help me correct what the actual law is. And then I'm going to have some questions for them on how big a change is this. It seems to me that this is a radical departure from 50 to 70 years in Mexico. And we're going to ask questions like, how are we even going to be able to restructure in 90 days? How is this going to affect the market? Will it affect Mexico's competitiveness? Will jobs be lost? That kind of thing. So first, let me ask my friends who are, Adalberto, can we see your picture again? Hopefully we haven't lost your connectivity, but I wondered if you could speak to the legal side of this, and not along in the weeds, because we're not all lawyers on here, but if you could give us just a brief overview of what happened, what does the law say? You're on mute. There you
Can you hear me
go.
now?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Doug, and everyone in this webinar. So to answer your question, Doug, Mike, the purpose of this reform is to, we see it from a tax collection perspective. The authority is trying to broaden its tax collection efforts, and in very broad and in a nutshell, how this law is structured. The reform touches upon 8 different laws, 6 of which are relevant for the private sector. 2 of those laws are relevant only for the government. And the reform, the laws that are being modified include the labor law, the social security law, the it's a federal housing fund law, and tax laws, such as the federal income tax law and value-added tax law as well. And so with these laws, and I'm not considering and I'm not mentioning the 2 laws that are relevant to the government, but just to make a quick note there, the government is the largest outsourcer in Mexico, and what these 2 laws are doing that are specific to the government, apply specifically to the government, are also forcing the government to transition out of the outsourcing regime and back into the direct hiring of the employees. And as you rightly pointed out, Mike, all these laws that I mentioned have harmonized the definition of what outsourcing of personnel services are. And it is by this harmonization that the tax laws have the exact same definitions as we find them in the labor law and the federal labor law. So,
Adalberto, can I ask you, I mean, a lot of the pundits and commentators, et cetera, have said that this is a direct, the direct effect is to redirect more profit sharing to workers and to eliminate the outsourcing function there. And so the employees would then become direct to the company instead of the typical system where there's an outsourcing company and then there's the operations company operating at very little profit, no profit to share, and then an outsourcing company with all of the employees, but none of the operations, et cetera, none of the profits to share either. So, and then a contract between the two of them. So this would be, as I understand it under the law, eliminated largely, and this company needing to take the workers directly to that company and profit share, et cetera. In addition to, as you said, 8 total laws making sure that all the benefits are there. Infonavit is there, Afore is there. You know, the retirement for all of these concepts being brought under and making sure that all those benefits are there. Very pro-employee reform, correct? Can I ask you, Tetakawi has done shelter operations for its clients. How does this affect a typical shelter arrangement? Can you share with us, what have you needed to do with your clients since the time that this law was passed a couple of weeks ago, and the time clock is running quickly to make these changes? What have you needed to do with your clients to restructure? What kind of workaround is Tetakawi looking at from a shelter relationship?
So, as you rightly pointed out earlier, Mike, it's 90 days that companies have to comply with the law. And I think, well, what any shelter or maquiladora companies right now is doing is trying to become compliant. And by doing so, these companies have the exact same situations as any other company in Mexico, which is how do those service providers in Mexico, how can those relationships become compliant? And the law now mandates, for example, that all the contracts that are entered into between Mexican companies and suppliers that provide services to companies like us and to any other company in Mexico, they must comply with certain requirements. And to give you an example, these companies are looking into those agreements with their suppliers, and they're looking into becoming compliant. Some of the requirements are that the contracts need to specifically provide for the number of employees, the type of work that is being done by those employees, etc. So there are several items that need to be complied with in order to be compliant. Also, we are looking into certain categories of service providers that will have to register as specialized service providers under the new law in Mexico. And with that registration, that's also one of the items that has to go in these agreements that we have with our service providers. And a quintessential example for this will be a securities services company, Mike, that's providing services to us, cleaning services companies that's providing services to companies like us. And so these are the relationships that right now we're vetting, and we're making sure that they're fully compliant.
Okay, and by compliance, does that mean that in some cases you'll need to restructure and make the relationship direct to the company that is your client in the shelter? Or how will you restructure a shelter that is largely outsourcing? How will you restructure for that client?
So let me give a step back, Mike, and in order to understand what I just mentioned, I think it's important to note that the law prohibits outsourcing, the outsourcing of personnel as you defined. It's the business purpose clause that's relevant here. And
Yes.
it's also the economic activity, the prevalent or the most important economic activity. How has the authority defined that? Well, it's how the tax authority looks at any business in Mexico and knows what's the prevalent economic activity of those companies by identifying the invoicing that those companies do and the concepts for those invoicing, right? So that's what's prohibited.
Can I ask you?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Can I ask you one other question? Do you think that, I mean, this is 90 days. You know, my experience is to do any kind of restructuring that requires new companies or a notary public to intervene and file something and set something up. I mean, we could see a big clog at the notary's public, you know, big clog at the notary's public trying to form new entities and restructure. Even if I had a plan today to restructure my company, isn't there a bit of a problem just getting it done in 90 days?
Yeah, so that's where I was going, Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it's this first part of the reform, and there's the second part of the reform that talks about specialized service providers. So when it comes to specialized service providers, these companies will have to register. And even though there's outsourcing, and as this example, the quintessential example that I mentioned, security services, cleaning services, whereby personnel from these companies comes to our premises and provides those services, these companies will have to register. And with that registration, they'll be able to operate and they'll be able to provide the services that we require from these type of companies. So these becoming compliant doesn't mean having to go through the bottleneck that you just mentioned, which is notary publics. The way these companies will become compliant is by registering and by amending the agreements that currently exist between their clients in order for those agreements to reflect the new requirements under the law. The registration being one of those requirements, right?
Okay. Thank you, and we'll come back to you in just a second. Raymundo, Raymundo does a lot of cross-border consulting with companies that are right in the mix of this. Raymundo, if you could come off mute, I see you're muted there. If you could remove your mute, but what is your perspective on this? How big a change is this? Is this huge, or is it not such a big deal? And how do you think this is going to affect the consulting relationships that you're working with in terms of how they have to make changes and restructure in the next 90 days?
Thank you very much, Mike. In Castle Consulting, we think that we have to analyze precisely the content of the law, and we have to analyze the frame of businesses, our customers, because every case is very, very different. But the regional economy, for example, here in Guanajuato, in the Bajío, where precisely a large number of companies, of automotive companies have been established here, for example, Honda, Nissan, etc. They are planning fast their changes because they have to adjust their budget, they have to adjust their labor plan. And the way that we have to take, and I concede with Adalberto, is to prepare a complaint and to give that complaint to the court, because in many cases we think this is a kind of abuse. And in many cases, many facilities and many businesses are going to close because the actual economic situation is very hard because of the pandemic, and other economic situations provided by the actual government. So there has been a lot of policies taken by federal government that doesn't allow to make businesses like it was before. So we are going to complain with the court, and we have to see that actually outsourcing is not defined in the law. It prohibited, but it doesn't define in the previous law. It defined very well in the articles 15A, 15B, 15C, and 15D. It was very, very well defined, but actually it doesn't, because if you see in the article 12, it says that outsourcing is prohibited. But after, in the 13th, it says it is permitted in some special services, but the law also doesn't define what is special services or professional services. So, and also it doesn't define what outsourcing is. It was very well defined in the previous law.
So Rodrigo, what you're telling us is you're expecting to see, not only is your consulting firm on behalf of some clients going to bring some, I'm guessing these are amparo or constitutional type appeals,
Of course, yes.
to say we want to stop the enforcement of the law as it applies to our client because or to Castel Consulting, et cetera, because of these anomalies in the law. Now, I'm assuming that this law was put together very quickly. It went through very fast. So I'm assuming that there are some things that clearly will need to be worked out, and you pointed out several. So you're expecting to see litigation. So there's a potential bottleneck for, even if there were no litigation, as we just spoke with Adalberto, with companies even just trying to get their compliance done within 90 days. And then we got the pandemic going on. And then you have some other issues here where you've identified that you're seeing potential for amparo or constitutional appeals. If I could jump, I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Raymundo.
Yes, I think that if many companies take the amparo and many companies join this allegation and this complaint to the court, the court will make feel the power of many companies, thousands of them, that could lead to make some changes, because it's very hard. Otherwise, many businesses are about to close in the next 4 or 5 years. Don't forget that pandemic hasn't ended. Yes. Still, and we don't know what is going to happen with the Indian coronavirus, but we live actually in a very big uncertainty law frame in Mexico.
Well, thank you, and we'll come back. And Eduardo Gonzalez, if you could come off mute, I want to ask you a couple of questions. Just from your background as foreign deputy trade minister prior to this administration, or up to right after the election, and then also your consulting cross-border. Eduardo does manufacturing consulting, basically, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years spent in Tijuana and Arizona and Southern California, helping US businesses find appropriate and efficient or effective manufacturing relationships in Mexico. I guess my big question is, from this side of the border as a consultant, what do you see is the effect? Is this going to create concern on behalf of American companies to go do their manufacturing in Mexico? If I could shoot a few questions at you, and then I'll just let you talk and give some responses. Do you think if I'm a company in Mexico and I have to now give 10% of my net profits to employees, are there going to be some companies that say, well, the way I'll deal with that is I'll reduce my workforce by 10%. I'll get rid of some employees? Or is there another way? Is there a workaround here? Contract manufacturing. Could you talk to us about some of these issues? Are there workarounds that can still keep Mexico as the powerhouse that it is in terms of competitive nearshore with China?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. First of all, thank you for the title of trade minister. It sounds pretty nice, but actually I was the trade commissioner.
Okay.
Mexico. Yeah.
Thank you.
Don't want to get anybody in trouble with that.
Okay.
Especially me. No, I'm kidding. Certainly these types of laws are going to make it a little bit more difficult for my colleagues doing foreign direct investment than for the states. this will add another layer of compliancy for companies that want to go into Mexico to do manufacturing. Of course, this is just more work for the labor lawyer, and they just will have to need to comply. Fortunately, if companies don't want to get into that type of hassle, I think the shelter option is a good option for them, and Takawi can talk a little bit more about that. But also, like you mentioned, there are some workarounds. If you're already in Mexico and you're thinking, what are we going to do to comply, especially in that short time limit? I certainly see some companies reducing their labor manufacturing until they're compliant. And one option, of course, is to get a contract manufacturer to do their work for them. And that's what we do. So we help companies locate options for contract manufacturing. And certainly right now, the economic timing is not that great. I mean, you have tariffs with China, you have logistics issues. Companies are complaining that their cost bringing their goods from China has doubled or tripled. The lead time has increased. So it looks like a great time for Mexico manufacturing right now. Of course, there are some other issues like access to raw materials. I think those are where Mexico is struggling right now. Because if you compare labor costs with China, I think is better or the same. And of course, you cannot beat Mexico for their geographic location to the U.S. market. So I think there's a lot of good things going on that benefit Mexico, but this type of modifications of the law make it a little bit difficult for companies to look at the Mexico option. This just adds another layer of difficulty, I will imagine. Yeah.
Now, Eduardo, I mean, when I've heard many of you as consultants, as you're talking to a cross-border client, talk about a 40 to 50% labor differential in Mexico versus the United States. And then obviously one thing that often does not come into the conversation of the comparison between China and Mexico, even if labor rates were and the cost of shipping and all of the other things were to come out fairly even, let's say, or even a little bit better for China. There is the USMCA, which gives a little bit of a bump coming into the United States if the North American content was actually created in Mexico. So would you still say to a client, Mexico is still a very good, attractive option for manufacturing?
Oh, of course, certainly it's one of the biggest players for the U.S. market. Of course, there are some sensitive products that probably Mexico will not be very competitive. If you are doing high volume, very low cost items, it's going to be very difficult for Mexico to compete. And of course, there are some components that China has cornered the market around the world. So probably some of those components still have to come in from China. But I think you cannot beat the location for logistics. Like you said, labor cost is pretty competitive. And of course, it is one of the best options right now for US companies to nearshore their operations or expand their manufacturing. I think Mexico is a good place to look as an option. And certainly another option is to get your suppliers from Mexico through a contract manufacturing, or if you want to do your business by yourself, your own manufacturing, and you want to get started right away, I think a shelter option is one of the best options out there right now.
Okay, shelter. Going back to you with Adalberto, if you could come off mute, if you're still there. There you are. Okay, tell me, Raymundo has said that there may be, well, they're planning some lawsuits and some amparos. What have you heard in terms of enforcement? I mean, is it going to be 90 days in the cliff on this one where there was going to be immediate enforcement, maybe just picking a few to make examples out of some big companies. What are you hearing and what are you seeing in terms of this? And do you think there is any potential for some renegotiation and softening of some of the provisions after this is fully swallowed and digested by the market? Do you think there's possibility that there'll be some ultimate changes to the law?
Yeah, well, Mike, on your first question, when it comes to enforcement, what we know is that the authorities are creating this registry of specialized services providers, right? And what we also have heard is that the authority is in a way creating a list of companies that they say to be specialized services providers. They won't be betting every company that's going into that's coming into this registry. So it's in a way they're relying on good faith. But these lists will be used by the authority to inspect. And my understanding is that they have rebumped or increased the budget for inspections, and specifically from the labor authorities in Mexico. And apparently, or what the authorities currently have in mind is to perform at least 40,000, and that's what has been published, 40,000 inspections throughout the year, right? And that's one of the reasons why they got this increase in funding. So, and on your second question, Mike, I think it's difficult to make a comment as to whether the law could be softened or not. It is, as you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, this came through prior to elections. Originally, was intended to become law after the elections. So it has been politicized as well, and the authorities are trying to use this as a win for the working class in Mexico and try to obtain more votes for the election. But it is unclear as to whether the current government will gain majority in both chambers next in a couple of weeks. And if that doesn't happen, then it's going to be difficult, I think, to make any changes to the current laws.
Adalberto, could I ask a follow-up question there? Does this law give I know there's an inspection right and the government can conduct enforcement if a company were to do nothing and not come into compliance and not make any changes. Is there also a private right of action on behalf of the employee and labor lawyers, if you would? Let's say I'm in a company that has the structure that is outsourcing, and this company decides not to share and not to make any changes and not to engage in compliance. Would the employees themselves be able to, under this law, would the employees be able to hire a labor lawyer and make a claim against that company of, you're not sharing the appropriate amounts with this group of employees from this company, perhaps labor sindicato, labor union actions, etc. Do you think we'll see some of that?
Well, that has been and will continue to be always a possibility, Mike. The labor laws as they are drafted in Mexico, and they are very pro-employee, and so employees will always have the right to demand what the law states that they are entitled to. So when it comes to benefits, the profit sharing, and each one of the items that comprise Social Security in Mexico, they always have that. They have always have that right, the private right, and they continue to have it under this reform. It's interesting to see the reform, Mike. It's comprehensive in a way, because as I mentioned, it touches upon 8 different laws, right? But once you see the actual changes, they're minimum. minimal changes, but they're substantive.
Okay.
So in a way, they're harmonizing these different laws, but the rights that these employees have had continue to be there, and they can continue to exercise those rights, including labor unions will be in such a position.
And Raymundo, another, if you could come off now too, and come off mute. Question for you. In addition to taking the actions of amparo or legal actions that way, on the other hand, I'm assuming that you're telling your clients that you're consulting with, bring this lawsuit, bring this action, but also over here, you need to prepare. What kind of workarounds are you, I'm not saying being non-compliant, but obviously be compliant, but what kind of opportunities are there for companies who are trying to figure out what steps do I need to take?
Well, Mike, I think that we have to study very well our customers and to define precisely what the problem are not the employees. We think that the problem are the services. What law defines actually as services is not very clear. So we have to work in this opportunity we have identified as an opportunity, and we have to find in every case where we can put specialized services in order to don't affect the business, the company, our customer, according with actually the law says. So for example, if we are working with a automotive manufacturing company, maybe we will look for a new frame of labor inside the company. For example, research or an investigation or marketing development or some other kind of activities that doesn't belong to the core of the business.
Okay, excellent. Eduardo, back to you, a question. We've actually got a question from the audience, from one of our participants.
I saw that.
You've seen it. And I want to, if I could phrase it to you, the question doesn't say whether you have lots of time or not. If you're in a hurry, I guess you have to go to a shelter, right? So you'd need to talk to a tetakawi or someone else if you're in a real hurry, right? If you need to do it tomorrow and you need to have turnkey, or some sort of contract manufacturing. But I guess my question is, what steps should they take as they're trying to decide, should we have a partner identified, or we have a joint venture partner in Mexico, or we may want to invest in an ongoing operation that's doing the same type of manufacturing as what we need. So in this case, you know, a food service, I mean, a food ingredient, you know, manufacturer has identified someone in Mexico who could do the same type of work they're doing. What kind of due diligence steps, I mean, and they're already along in their discussions, what kind of due diligence steps should they do to step back now that this big law has been dropped in their lap? What do they need to do in those discussions, in that relationship? Or, I mean, do they need a consultant? Do they need some help? Of course, everybody on this call thinks, yes, the answer to that is yes, but let's give them some help.
Sure. Yeah, certainly they're going to need some support, somebody to help them out. And I think a joint venture is a good solution for somebody who's trying to get into the country to do their own manufacturing. Partnering with someone that has already the permits, the employees, the experience is a good option. Some of the due diligence that they need to do, they have to check if they are in good standing with paying their taxes. If they don't have any, help me out, demandas? What is the translation?
They don't have any lawsuits?
Any lawsuit, right. So check if they don't have any lawsuits. Check if they are in good standing with the business chamber, the local chamber. And probably will be also good for them to talk to some of the suppliers if they pay it on time and the customers. So I think those are very general terms, but I think that will be the first steps for a company to look at, just to see if there are any issues, any outstanding issues they should be looking into. And then also talk to some local businesses and relationships to see if they know them. And I think the best way to do this, unfortunately, is to hire someone to do that for them. But I think that is very doable. Yeah.
And in addition to your list of things to check, if you're already talking to a partner in Mexico who's going to do some manufacturing for them, a very direct question that they ought to be having at this point is, what is your current status? Are you outsourcing labor?
Right.
I'll call them partner. Partner SADCV, is a partner. Do they have a partner operations company and a partner services company where they are outsourcing their labor to their operations company? And are you thinking that you're going to invest in this company here, in both? What is your relationship, and what is that company's current strategy for compliance with this law? Are they going to bring their employees? Are they going to collapse these two companies together so that these employees are getting part of all of these? Are they going to do some sort of other arrangement to procure their labor force? And so that is probably one of the key questions. But I love the list that you just gave. Taxes, good standing, that needs to be all part of the acquisition agreement or joint venture agreement that you're drafting with them. Very carefully make sure in these times, the whole world knows there's a new law, and so this needs to be, you need to ask with your partner, are you in compliance?
Right. So
what's your strategy?
Yeah, those are more common sense lists, and of course you have to check the legal and the accounting, but that's more detail oriented, more professional oriented. But yeah, you're right on target on your comments, Mike.
And the a couple of questions coming in from our audience as well. Are there? I don't know who wants to take this. Raymundo, Adalberto. What is your opinion? Are there additional steps that we can expect during the remaining years of? We're about halfway to the sexennial right now. Has AMLO telegraphed that there are other business initiatives like this one that are coming down in the next 3 years before he leaves office? Will there be other big ones that we should know about? Come off of mute if you're going to talk, Raymundo or Adalberto.
Okay, I think that we have to make a lot of communication with our customers and with some other companies that in order that clarify very well what the law wants to tell us, and to make a common front in order to make pressure to the Congress, to the federal government. The elections are closer, so we think that the actual party are not going to maintain the control in the Congress. So I think the main thing is that establish what is outsourcing, what is professional services, and what is the purpose of the law that undoubtedly is to collect taxes, more taxes. So we have to defend to this situation of the federal government.
So we're going to keep our eyes open on whether there are additional tax initiatives to collect more taxes.
Yes, and yes, it is planned that by closing 2021, the federal government is about to establish a new tax reform in the whole country. So we don't know what is the contents, but we think it comes very, very strong. It will take the inner market that companies are, and I think it will enforce very, very, very much the actual law reform, the actual labor reform.
Okay.
Among other things.
Adalberto, what other changes do you see possibly could come down the pike in the next 3 years? Do you see anything else that's hanging on the horizon?
Thank you, Mike. No, well, I personally, I don't see any big changes coming along. As Raymundo mentioned, it will also depend on whether the current government maintains a majority in Congress or not in the next couple of weeks. But what I can tell you, and this is to reaffirm Eduardo's position, there's a lot of interest right now in companies from all over the world in Mexico. There are companies in our segment, in our line of business, that are getting 1 or 2 new clients every month. So there is a lot of activity, and we think that that activity will definitely continue. The advice that I could provide is always rely on a trusted counselor, and make sure that the items that were discussed and listed by Eduardo and by you, Mike, that are taking into consideration when entering into a relationship with doing business, actually, specifically in Mexico.
Good. If I could move to a couple more questions, and Eduardo, if you want to weigh in on this, will this, although this seems big to us because we're Mexico watchers, and you know, this seems like a big blip on our radar because it is a significant law. In the grand scheme of things, Mexico is still competitive. Do you think this will have an impact overall on investment in Mexico? And will it really make a difference, a huge difference, or will people just figure out, as Adalberto has said and Raymundo has said, people are going to work out workarounds, and they're just going to keep going very creatively? But then the other, and answer that one, and then I'd like to throw out a last one from Hank Marshall to everyone, and that is, do you see an opportunity? There have been recently Chinese companies coming into Mexico to increase their market share. Do you think that you'll see Chinese companies coming into Mexico and setting up so that they're closer geographically to the US?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I can start. So I've been talking to a lot of state governments in Mexico, and they certainly have seen an increase in Chinese companies visiting the region. There are some Chinese investments coming in. It is not a tsunami of Chinese companies, but I mean investing, but there's certainly some interest. And of course, the current situation, the economic situation, I think companies are going to still be interested in investing in Mexico and going into Mexico because of all the things going on with China and Asia and COVID in India and all that, and also the need for nearshoring. So I think this situation right now is just going to be another hurdle for companies to oversee. And yeah, I think the interest is going to be there, and I don't think it's going to affect much because of the current economic situation. If it was different, probably it will affect even more. But right now, I think it's just another box to check and another issue to see. And certainly the advantages are there in Mexico, of course.
Well, if it's any, I know this is just anecdotal, but every time I go to the T2 in Mexico City, I see more and more Asian companies greeting each other. There's a lot of deal making going on in Mexico. And when we went to Sinaloa, I see David Farkas on the call, and some others, Mike Jameson, et cetera. When we went to Sinaloa, there was a Chinese company there offering to buy up a produce out of Sinaloa, et cetera. A lot of interest. So Hank, I think in response to your question, I'd be surprised if they didn't. They know that the transportation and geography issue is a disadvantage, and yet they're good at manufacturing. And I think we will see joint ventures between Chinese companies and Mexican companies. Doug, we're at our end on time. Do you want to wrap this up?
I'd like to go longer, but because it's such an interesting topic, really timely too. So Mike, in terms of kind of what the next steps are, how should somebody like Mike Jameson or somebody who's very active in kind of the market, what should they be doing right now? What would your advice be?
Well, I would be talking to my advisors. If you work with a Tetakawi already, you should be talking to Adalberto and his team about how does this affect us? Do we need to rearrange our contracts? Do we need to do something different? If you were on your way into Mexico and you had to do this immediately and you need immediately turnkey compliance with this, I think Adalberto's and a shelter relationship is a good option. If you got a little more time, it's not a comparison. Eduardo works very closely with Tetakawi as well. But if contract manufacturing is an option for you, or other joint venture relationships, which were discussed today, and you can do your own due diligence, there's several professionals on the call here, and I see Christian Aguirre too. Christian, give you your due as well, and David Farca. All of us are working in this cross-border. We're dripping with people that can help you make sure you get this right. The worst thing would be not to call anyone. And so this is a time for you to be calling your accountants, your tax people. This would be a time to be calling your lawyers, both on the U.S. and Mexican side, to get advice. And this is a time for you to be calling your consultants like Raymundo and Eduardo and saying, what are the best alternatives for me? What are the workarounds? And of course, Tetakawi in our region, a real giant that has proven itself to many Arizona companies.
Thank you, Mike. Mike's email is mpatterson@spencerfane.com. If you have any issues getting a hold of Mike or anybody on the call today, let us know. You just send an email to info@globalchamber.org, and we'll make sure that you get connected. Mike is a partner at Spencer Fane. We also heard today from Eduardo Gonzalez, who's the president at 258 Consulting. Adalberto Elias is the contracts manager and general counsel at Tetakawi. And then Raymundo Rodriguez is the principal at Castel Consulting. I'd like to thank Kristen Aguirre, who Mike referenced there, Global Chamber in Hermosillo, and also Arturo Zamaripa of Global Chamber Guanajuato for your help in securing Raymundo's participation today. Some really amazing experts on the line today. Mike, your comment about that we're dripping with experts, that's stuck in my head, so the visual image of that is starting to bother me, but maybe I'll get to point. It's some sort of a cross-cultural, probably language thing or something. Is there a saying in Mexican about in Spanish about
estamos repletos de expertos, o sea, tenemos mucha ayuda aquí. We're all over it. I mean, there's call anybody on the screens or David or Christian. I mean, there's a lot of help here.
Fantastic. I also welcome any of the speakers on this call. Later today, we have a Global Chamber Los Angeles meetup. I encourage you to participate in that call too, so that we can communicate to Southern California about this issue, which I think clearly is something that everybody doing business in Mexico or thinking about it should be aware of. Mike, you're amazing. Thank you for moderating today. My job as a moderator is in jeopardy with your expertise today. Thank you. If you're busy with the law and helping people in that way, so I guess from that perspective, I'm probably safe. You wouldn't want to do this for a living. You're doing some great work for a living and helping our members and others be successful internationally. People like Wisdom Natural Brands, who you referenced earlier. Thanks everybody for the time today. Thanks everybody for the information, and do get in touch with us, whether it's this issue or any other issue related to international business. We are dripping with the right people, so please contact us. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Eduardo. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Raymundo. Good to see you.
Likewise.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian.
Bye, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Adalberto,
Eduardo.
thank you. Good to see you again.
Adios, Albert.
Raymundo, nice to meet you. Bye.
Adios.
Adios.